1989. I saw the tall, bearded man standing alone in the gravel parking lot outside the administration building of the Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge and recognized him right away from photos on the backs of book dust covers. As we approached him, I said, "You have to be Edward Abbey." "I don't have to be, but I am," he replied. "I just wanted to thank you for all the good reading material you've provided over the years," I said. "I'm glad you liked it," he said. He shook my hand, a bit reluctantly, then turned immediately to Glenda, taking her elbow and guiding her down the steps to the building entranceway. He asked her, "Are you a volunteer on this Desert Bighorn Sheep Survey too? Have you ever done one before? What's your name?" I followed behind them. I saw him again 4 months later at the annual Survivors of the El Camino del Diablo party at Bill Broyles' house in Tucson. I remember him gnawing on a huge beef rib bone, refusing alcohol because he was already well lit, humorously answering questions about eco-sabotage from a couple of young fans. He directed looks and statements at Glenda, who was standing next to them, and occasionally glanced at me leaning in a corner against the kitchen sink. I kept thinking, if only the pair would pause in their ceaseless environmental babble, I might be able to get him talking about the craft of writing. But I was too shy to break into the conversation, and then he was gone as suddenly as he had arrived. He had decided it was time to go back home. It wasn't many months after that when he left us all for good. That is a small segment in the current book of this rant titled Tracks in the Sand. Tales from Outside City Limits. It is written by Dexter K. Oliver. As far as used books go, this one is the kind I really appreciate for a lot of different reasons. And the content of the book is incredibly fun for me to read as well. So firstly, I paid $5 for this book, and those $5 were $5 well spent. This book was published in 2003 out of Duncan, Arizona, a company called Bandit Press. The author Dexter K. Oliver, and the title page says all DKO photos unless labeled otherwise, abbreviating his name. This is a limited first edition of 250 copies, of which this is number 54, as is seen in the author's writing on the cover page. In some of the blank space in the middle of the page, he has written, "To Tracy Reyes, my fellow inmate who understands that hours are like diamonds. Don't let them waste." The table of contents are very interestingly organized, 16 separate chapters, if you want to call them that, as well as a little vignette between each one. The preface reads, "I came to the Southwest, and Arizona in particular, in fits and starts. In 1961, when I was 13, my father was the director of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City and took the family on a cross-country jaunt, visiting other such institutions, including the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum and the Phoenix Zoo. 2 years later, I came back as a resident volunteer at the Southwest Research Station in Portal, Arizona. A year after that, I ran away as far as Texas before coming to my senses and returning home to get a high school diploma. When I was 18, I was a zoology major at the University of Arizona in Tucson. I thought I was back to stay." And so he describes that he ended up getting drafted into the Army during Vietnam and a couple other road bumps along the way that eventually pulled him back to Arizona. And finally, he says, "And yet the Southwest that fired my imagination when I first saw it is still a place of magic where human batteries can be recharged and adventures await in desert valleys, river canyons, and mountain forests. But like an endangered species of animal, the little wild habitat that still remains will only continue to exist if it is recognized and cherished as something of value. Thank you, Robert Ruark, by all of us." The following are what I would call eclectic tales from outside city limits. A lot of the material, in one form or another, has appeared in the Arizona Daily Star, Arizona Highways, Arizona Wildlife Views, the Ajo Copper News, Birdwatcher Digest, Desert Skies, Discover the Colorado River magazine, and Safari magazine. Some of the essays might be viewed in a nostalgic light because so much change has taken place since the action occurred. It takes years to become a decent field naturalist, the key word here being field. You have to pay your dues, spending a lot of time out there, whether doing actual research or just exploring new country. The good part is that it's usually rewarding and fun, the non-academic structure less influenced by bias. And the people you meet along the way can be just as important as the wildlife, teaching you new perspectives about the world and about yourself. This is a book written by someone who lives in the Southwest, the part of the US that I live in, and I look up to the author in a role model way because he also came from out east. He grew up looking at all those museums, and personally, I grew up in the mid-Atlantic region in Maryland and Virginia, and I would go to the Smithsonian Institution when I had time, whether that's the Baltimore Aquarium, the Smithsonian National Zoo, the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, a lot of those parks in the area. I would spend time canoeing, hiking, all sorts of activities in that area. I always wanted to come out west, and specifically to New Mexico, where my dad was born and raised, where my mom spent her middle and high school years. In New Mexico, I have found mountains I absolutely enjoy. When I worked at that summer camp in 2018 and 2019 that I've mentioned in other videos, where some people spent their days off going into Albuquerque or going to Gallup and reabsorbing some civilization, a couple of times I spent my days off exploring the national forest, the Cibola National Forest, which was right next to the camp, and just exploring off trail and finding a elk skeleton that had been nestled up against a fallen tree the way a mountain lion might hide it. I found bear tracks. I found log cabins in the woods that I didn't know existed but were evidence of logging in that area in the 1920s and 30s. Glass jars that managed to survive in those corners of the log cabins, tucked away in dirt and now filled with detritus. A old log bridge from when it was still a logging area going over a stream bed out there, a canyon. Elk antlers right by the edges of arroyos where the canyons were rocky and 30 feet deep, and the antler dropped right at the rim of it. All these different things, finding mushrooms, old remnants of logging, chains, and all this kind of thing. That is what I loved doing on my days off, and I admire people who are able to live their lives doing that. And I don't really have that luxury. I'm very removed from the parts of the Southwest I really want to be exploring. It's a 3.5 hour drive to the Gila Mountains, to the wilderness areas and the national forests west of the Rio Grande. But it is something that they got to do in generations before me, before New Mexico and Arizona started really being populated by people from either coast. And I recognize that I myself am one of those people. And so a lot of these stories are ones that I can admire because it covers a broad range of years. The table of contents covers from 1963 until 2003 and discusses things such as the Sky Island Blues, endangered species and politics, or learning desert realities at an early age in 1964 and that runaway period of his life, or Owl Hoot Trail 1989, Mexican spotted owls and politics, and even the last one, When Wolves Come Calling, 2002, Mexican gray wolf reintroduction. These are all moments in the Southwest's history that are very contemporary, and yet are times when these famous individuals were out there doing their things. Gary Paul Nabin, Edward Abbey, Terry Tempest Williams, Rick Bass, Doug Peacock, and Dexter K. Oliver. I keep track of all of these moments where one author meets or discusses another author in their travels and then mention it in one of their books. This is one of those examples. Dexter K. Oliver got to meet them and interact with some of them. Additionally, in this used book, there are a few pages that are dog-eared. I never dog-ear pages, but this one in particular looks very deliberately dog-eared. I don't know what the importance of this page is, but it's in the chapter titled Mayan Temples, Tropical Jungles, and the Real Indiana Jones, 1988, and has one character, one person interacting with others speaking Spanish. And does this place have any name at all? I asked. Juan calls it Temple 1. I guess I'll have to go with that for now. I'll do more research when I get home and see if anyone has recorded it, and if so, by what name. Roger and Juan trudged up to join us. ¿Es correcto, Juan? ¿Esta ruina se llama Templo Uno? I asked. No, se llama Templo Juan, he answered. I laughed. Gord, you have to take those Spanish lessons. Our friend here told you Juan, not one. You're kidding. Why is he naming it after himself? Gord exclaimed. Why not? It's his discovery. Maybe we should call it Templo Juan Brown if I'm going to be the one to write it up for the rest of the world. Shouldn't it be partly named after me? I looked at Roger. The real Indiana Jones, I said, laughing again. So one of those moments in his life where he gets to work with an archaeologist, a really interesting exchange. He has some pictures of himself with a Komodo monitor at the Bronx Zoo in 1955, seen on this page. There's pictures of him with a diamondback rattlesnake in hand in 1978, and with a tranquilized mountain lion in 1977, and just look at that stash. So that's the kind of guy he presents himself to be in these pictures, and you see all sorts of other scenes in this book as he describes them. It's a fascinating book. There's not too many, or really, I think I've only found one or two underlinings or highlightings in this book, signs of very minimal use. And lastly, I found this, which is a invoice for an appliance service in 2011. The fridge needed some repairs. Motor runs, but no pressure shaft. Rusted off motor, won't spin, is something or other. The technical service / labor, Carl, number 1254, and then how much the repair and service cost. So that was one of those old, bookmarks or whatever that people use. This was stuck in that book when I bought it at Coas in Las Cruces, and finding, a signed copy with a personal handwritten note, a invoice for someone else who is very clearly not that person, the stories with Edward Abbey and with other people. This is a really fascinating book about someone that lives and works in Arizona, and I think it was definitely worth the $5 I paid for it. If you find this book, Tracks in the Sand, I would recommend picking it up and reading it. It's a lot of bite-sized portions of book that you can read. These chapters are disconnected from each other. Because they're disconnected, you can pick it up, put it back down again. Maybe read this book while reading another book. Have this on the shelf or on the table by your recliner and just read it in bite-sized portions. But I liked this book, and I think if you've liked any of these books about the Southwest or about nature writing, any of these videos about those books or any of those books themselves, I think this is a good book for you to pick up, and I recommend you picking it up at a used bookstore if you find it. I don't think you're going to find it at a new bookstore unless it's something like a national park or some similar kind of property, a park property where they sell books by local authors about the local area. Yeah, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.